Hello! In this video we are going to look at David Hume's metaethical claim that you cannot derive an ought from an is. David Hume was a realist metaethical philosopher in that he didn't believe that there are such things as moral facts. So what does he mean by derive to begin with? Firstly, derivation in Hume's case at least means logically drawing a moral conclusion from facts, or as A.J. Ayer might call them later on, natural features. He thinks that it is not possible to logically derive what you should or ought to do from the facts. Okay? Hence, you cannot derive an ought, which is what you ought to do, from an is, which is the state of affairs. Okay? So our moral decisions in relation to the facts are based on our own value systems, right? Our own subjective opinions, if you like. Ought obviously implies obligation. So you ought to give to charity, or you ought not to steal. All right? Both of those are saying essentially you should give to charity and you shouldn't steal. Okay? It's telling you that you must or should act in certain ways. Now, Hume believes that we get our ideas of right and wrong from our feelings, okay, from how we naturally, perhaps psychologically react to the facts, okay. So this means that the concepts we acquire are by reflection on our own inward states, all right. So we feel angry, or we feel happy, or we feel fearful, and those repeated experiences will provide us with a sense of rightness and wrongness. Okay, but they're not logically derived from what there is. They're not logically derived from the facts. They are just how we respond. Okay, so rightness and wrongness and all our moral thoughts and qualities are dependent on our natural reactions. And these ideas are generated by reflecting on our own feelings. All right. So, according to Hume, morality is thus a matter of feeling rather than reason. An example might help to make this clear. Some of you may have come across the BBC television presenter Chris Packham. He presents Spring Watch and Autumn Watch and so on. And not so long ago, there was quite a bit of concern about whether the panda would become a globally extinct species in the wild. And there was quite a lot of publicity on this. It made the news. You may remember stories about certain zoos actually celebrating the fact that pandas had been born in captivity, because of course it raises the number of pandas that there are that there may be to sort of be re-released later on. Now, Chris Packham was very much in favour of saving the panda, but he also pointed out that there was a dung beetle, a species of dung beetle, I think, that lived in the Sahara Desert that was also threatened with global extinction. And he made the claim that the science tells us that we ought to conserve both these species equally. We shouldn't just prefer the panda. Now, Hume would criticise Chris Packham here. He would say that Chris Packham is wrong. The science does not tell us what we should do. It only tells us what the facts are. So, yes, the panda is globally threatened, and yes, the dung beetle is globally threatened. Those are both facts, what Hume would call is, right? Things that are the case. And these things are told to us by scientists. But these facts cannot actually tell us what we should do. That is much more down to how we feel about the facts. All right. Hence Hume's claim that you cannot derive what you should do or what you ought to do from an is. You know, what is the case. So reason in that sense plays no part in motivating action. Our motivations come from within. They come from with how we respond to the situation. So there's nothing true or false about anger, for example. It may be true or false that I am angry, but the anger itself has no reference to any other object. Similarly, my feelings of wanting to help the panda and or the dung beetle, or neither, right? It might be true that I have those feelings, but there's nothing true or false about those feelings themselves, all right? In the case of moral action, the rightness and wrongness of an action has its roots in our reflective impressions. In other words, how we reflect on our feelings, not about the facts themselves. And so we are motivated morally by what Hume calls the passions, right? Our feelings. And once we've got our motivations clear, then these passions can be guided by reason. All right? So the motivations themselves are subjective. Once we are clear about what our motivations are and how we want to act in relation to them, that is where reason comes into play. All right? So reason plays no part in the motivation side of things. It doesn't tell us what we should value, but once we have got a set of values, then we can use reason to guide how best to execute our desires in order to get what we want. Now, Hume gives the example of saying that someone who comes to know that 12 times 72 equals 864 has used reason to acquire such knowledge. But there's nothing intrinsically motivating about what is known. So 12 times 72 equals 864 in itself has no motivating features. However, if you were a shopkeeper and doing arithmetic and mathematics was an essential part of keeping your business alive, then of course there would be motivation. So the motivation is subjective, okay? There are certain facts, such as 12 times 72 equals 864, but those facts don't play a role in guiding our actions. It's only when we have certain values that those things become important to us. Okay? So as Hume says, an arithmetical fact on its own gives us no more reason for acting one way than it does another. Okay? So the moral action itself, or the action, any action in relation to that, is motivated by feelings and passion rather than anything else. Okay? So our reasons for acting are provided by our passions. Another example may help make this clear. You might have 6 bottles of beer in the fridge. Now, that is a fact. There are 6 bottles of beer in the fridge. But you will only feel motivated to go and get one if you like beer and or you are thirsty. Okay? So the motivation is utterly subjective. Passions are a part of human nature, Hume believes, and they're neither true or false. Okay? They are an original part of our existence. Now, this argument, Hume believes, has what he calls a double advantage. Okay, there are 2 strands to it. The first is that reason can't deliver judgments about the justness or rightness of any action, because emotions, or passions as Hume calls them, are not representations of reality. They don't represent natural features. They are rather reactions to those natural features. And secondly, having shown that only our emotions are what is behind our actions, or what initiates actions, given that morality is bound up with our actions and our motivations for them, the sole basis of morality cannot be reason. It must be our internal reasons for acting, our internal value systems, our motivations, what we like and what we dislike. And Hume essentially says that what we morally approve of is what we like, and what we morally disapprove of is largely what we don't like. And in this, there are some similarities with A.J. Ayer's position. Okay? So what objections are there to Hume's position? Well, firstly, morality is answerable to human emotion, to human passion. And as such, it is unreliable and vulnerable to inconsistency, because our emotions are unreliable and inconsistent. So it's quite possible, for example, that we might go to bed with one view and wake up entirely with another. I might go to bed, for example, thinking that it's a really good thing to give to charity, but the following morning wake up and think, no, not really, it's an awful lot of bother, and why, for example, should I give away my hard-earned cash? Secondly, if I say, for example, that you ought not to punch someone because it would harm them, this presupposes that causing harm is actually bad or immoral, suggesting a measure of objectivity. And of course, Hume rules out objectivity. So, yeah, if you say you shouldn't, or I say you shouldn't punch this person because it will harm them, then I'm actually, in essence, suggesting that not harming someone is an objective truth of morality, whereas, according to Hume, it's not. So perhaps I shouldn't use ought at all. Perhaps all I'm doing really is imposing my value system on somebody else who doesn't share the same value system. The same could be said about giving to charity. All right? So that, in a very short space of time, is in essence why Hume believes you cannot derive an ought from an is. And of course, there are some fairly substantial similarities between Hume's position and the position adopted by A.J. Ayer a couple of hundred years later in his theory of emotivism. Okay, that's it for this video.